The auto-pay alert pops up on your screen on the 3rd of every month. By now, you don't even read it, you just sense it happening. Here's what that notification never tells you: the dealership that sold you your car pocketed roughly $279 in profit off the vehicle itself. That's less than the cost of a decent set of tires. I'm Yank, and I dig through auto lending data so you don't have to. That tiny number isn't proof dealers are struggling, it's proof the car itself was never really the product being sold. The real money is hiding elsewhere in your contract, and it's still quietly draining out on the 3rd of every month. Danielle signed her paperwork on a Thursday night next to a dish of butterscotch candies. Marcus has signed 3 separate deals in 4 years. Priya signed hers 11 days after Danielle, on almost the identical car, at a different dealership. One of these 2 women ended up paying about $4,300 more than the other. I'll reveal which one by the end. Here's something almost nobody outside the car industry realizes: the vehicle itself has become the bait. Profit made on the actual metal has cratered, down to that $279 figure. 2 years earlier, it sat north of $6,000. Meanwhile, the finance office was pulling in about $1,975 per vehicle. Analysts now estimate that office accounts for up to 73% of a dealership's variable gross profit. Nearly 3/4 of the profit is generated in a room most buyers don't even realize they're about to sit in. So let's say you spent 3 weeks reading reviews, emailing 4 dealers for quotes, and walked out having negotiated the price down by $2,300. That's exactly what Danielle did, and she had every right to feel proud. But she also won the least important negotiation in the building, which isn't a knock on her. It's a knock on a system that spent 40 years training all of us to fixate on a number that no longer decides the real outcome. Nearly every dealership in America uses a worksheet called the Four-Square, 4 boxes on a single page: price, trade-in, down payment, monthly payment. Its real purpose isn't organizing the deal, it's making 4 separate negotiations feel like one conversation, because pressure applied to one box just shows up as relief in another. The finance manager circles a number in felt-tip pen and slides the sheet toward you like a chess move. So let's take that sheet apart, box by box, because everything that happened to you lives inside one of these 4 squares. Box 1, what you paid for the car. Box 2, what they give you for your trade-in. Box 3, the loan. Box 4, the back-end products sold to you after you thought you were done. We've already covered box 1, that $279. Whatever you managed to shave off the sticker price was a fight the dealership could afford to lose, which is exactly why box 2 gets far more interesting. Box 2 is where Marcus lives. He drives for work, cracked phone mount on the windshield, a folder of receipts stuffed in the door pocket, and a new car roughly every 20 months since 2022. His first was a mid-size sedan, and he owed about $4,000 more on it than it was worth. The salesman said something that sounded, in the moment, like a favor: "Don't worry about it, we'll just roll that into the new loan." And they did. The $4,000 he still owed on the car he was trading in got folded into the principal of the car he was driving home in. He never wrote a check. He never felt a thing. He simply started paying interest for the next 72 months on a car he no longer even owned. 2 years later, he did it again. This time the hole was about $7,000 bigger, because the original $4,000 had been quietly compounding the whole time. Then he did it a 3rd time. Marcus isn't some rare outlier, he's roughly the middle of the pack. As of the 3rd quarter of 2025, 28.1% of new car trade-ins carried negative equity, averaging $6,950 underwater. Precision matters here. That figure is a mean, not a median, so it's pulled upward by the worst cases, meaning the typical underwater buyer is in somewhat better shape than the headline suggests. But the overall share isn't in dispute. Rolled over negative equity is basically consumer finance's version of a chain letter. Each deal resolves the discomfort of the last one by making the next one worse. And because it never shows up as a check you have to write, it feels like nothing happened at all. Marcus's fourth car is a perfectly ordinary sedan, except he's financing 3 previous cars inside of it. Here's what I really want you to sit with: being underwater doesn't feel like anything. That's the entire problem. Nothing shows up in the mail. No number turns red. It stays completely invisible right up until the day you try to leave. It's checking your trade-in value on your phone at a stoplight, then checking it again because you assume you typed something wrong. It's discovering that downgrading to a cheaper car would actually cost you $6,000 you don't have. It's the slow realization that the car sitting in your driveway isn't an asset you own, it's a bill you're standing next to. Which brings us to box 3, the loan. Box 3 has 2 halves: how long it runs, and what it costs. Both of those were set by somebody else, not you. Start with the length, since it's the biggest lever, and the one people pull on themselves. Back in 2015, loans of 84 months or longer made up about 7.3% of new car financing. By mid-2025, that number had climbed to 21.5%, and it has since touched a record 23.9%. 1 in 4 new car buyers is now signing a 7-year loan. That barely existed a decade ago, and it wasn't invented because buyers asked for it. It was invented because prices outran incomes, and somebody still had to make the monthly payment work. Take $42,000 financed, close to today's average, at around 7%. Over 60 months, that costs roughly $7,900 in interest. Stretch it to 72 months, and it's about $9,600. Stretch it to 84 months, and you're near $11,300. The monthly payment drops about $130, while the total cost climbs $3,400. That's the trade being offered to you silently every time someone says, "Well, we could bring that payment down." But interest isn't even the expensive part. The expensive part is what loan length does to your equity. A new car sheds roughly 16 to 20% of its value in the first year alone. That loss is front-loaded. A loan, on the other hand, is back-loaded, so early payments are mostly interest and your principal barely budges for the first 2 years. 2 curves moving in opposite directions at different speeds, the gap between them is the window where you owe more than the car is worth. On a 60-month loan with real money down, that window is short and shallow. On an 84-month loan with nothing down, that window covers most of the loan. Every single one of Marcus's rollovers was on a 72-month loan, which is exactly why the whole never got the chance to close before he was back in the showroom. That's not a flaw in the 7-year loan, that is the 7-year loan. Worth noting, roughly 1.73 million vehicles were repossessed in 2024. Hold on to that number, we'll come back to it, and it gets worse. Now, the second half of box 3, the rate. This one genuinely surprises people who consider themselves financially savvy. When you finance through a dealership, the dealership usually isn't lending you the money directly, it's a middleman. It sends your application to a bank, credit union, or captive finance company, and that lender sends back a buy rate, the rate they'll actually fund the loan at, based on your credit. You never see that buy rate. What you see is the sell rate, which is the buy rate plus whatever markup the dealership adds on top. Think of a hotel calling you a cab, except the hotel gets to decide what the meter reads. That spread is called dealer reserve, and it typically runs 1 to 2.5 percentage points. Research from the Center for Responsible Lending found average markups of 2.5 points, adding roughly $714 to the average loan on $40,000 over 60 months. A single point of markup alone runs close to $1,000. And here's what settles any debate about whether this is harmless: because the markup was discretionary, an actual person deciding, case by case, how much to charge, it produced outcomes that regulators found were not evenly distributed. Toyota Motor Credit settled with federal regulators in 2016 for up to $21.9 million in restitution to minority borrowers who were overcharged this way. Honda, Ally, and Fifth Third settled similar cases. So when the finance manager says, "Let me see what I can get you," take that sentence literally, he's not searching. He already knows. He's deciding. This is the one box Priya had already neutralized before she ever walked through the door, and we'll get to exactly how. Which brings us to box 4, and back to Danielle, and the butterscotch. She was led into a small office with a glass door, a candy dish that looked older than the building itself, and a chair positioned about 2 inches lower than his, which, I promise you, is not a furniture accident. On the desk sat a laminated menu. That's standard, it's called a menu presentation, and it exists because arranging products in a grid makes turning all of them down feel vaguely rude. For columns, usually labeled good, better, best, +1 so loaded it's earned its own name. Here's what was actually on it, and what those things really cost. An extended warranty, technically a vehicle service contract, priced at 2 to 3 times what the identical coverage costs from a direct provider. Dealer profit on just one commonly lands between $600 and $1,200. Gap coverage, which covers the difference between what you owe and what the car is worth if it's totaled, is genuinely useful for exactly the people who are underwater, which, as we've established, is a whole lot of us these days. Your own insurer or credit union will sell you the same coverage for $150 to $400. In that office, it runs $600 to $1,200. On the desk sat a laminated menu. That's standard, it's called a menu presentation, and it exists because arranging products in a grid makes turning all of them down feel vaguely rude. For columns, usually labeled good, better, best, +1 so loaded it's earned its own name. Here's what was actually on it, and what those things really cost. An extended warranty, technically a vehicle service contract, priced at 2 to 3 times what the identical coverage costs from a direct provider. Dealer profit on just one commonly lands between $600 and $1,200. Gap coverage, which covers the difference between what you owe and what the car is worth if it's totaled, is genuinely useful for exactly the people who are underwater, which, as we've established, is a whole lot of us these days. Your own insurer or credit union will sell you the same coverage for $150 to $400. In that office, it runs $600 to $1,200. That's the last trick, and the simplest one. Nothing in that room is ever priced in actual dollars. $41 a month across 72 months comes out to $2,952, plus interest, since it's financed, something nobody bothers to mention, because nobody's required to. Marcus has bought a warranty in that same chair 3 separate times. He's never once filed a claim on any of them, because he trades the car in before the factory coverage even runs out. 2 more tricks live at the edges of that sheet, and you should be able to spot both from across a parking lot. The first is called spot delivery, or yo-yo financing. You sign, drive home, post the photo online, then days later, the phone rings, and you're told your financing fell through. Come back in and re-sign at a higher rate. The contract you drove home with was conditional, and you almost certainly never noticed. There's no federal rule against the abusive version of this practice, and consumer advocates have documented buyers who lost both their down payment and their only way to get to work over it. The second is the lease, which doesn't quote you a rate at all, it quotes something called a money factor, a decimal so tiny it reads like a rounding error, 0.00200. Multiply it by 2,400, and that harmless-looking decimal turns out to be 4.8%. It gets marked up just like any other rate, and dealerships aren't required to disclose it to you. Now, some of you have been waiting to bring up the new tax deduction, so let's address it. The 2025 federal tax law created a deduction for auto loan interest. It's real, and also much narrower than the headlines made it sound. New vehicles only, no used cars, no leases, final assembly required in the United States, and it phases out at higher income levels. Here's the actual math. $33,000 financed at 7.2% generates about $2,340 in interest during year 1. In the 22% tax bracket, that's a tax reduction of roughly $515, real money, no question. But that's also about 4 months' worth of the extra interest you agreed to by stretching your loan from 60 months to 84. It's a rebate on a decision, not a reason to make one. And now, the number I told you to hold on to, because the stakes stopped being theoretical a while ago. Subprime auto borrowers 60-plus days past due hit 6.74% in December of 2025, the worst reading in a series stretching back 32 years. Those 1.73 million repossessions in 2024. You have to go back to 2009 to find a comparable figure. Except in 2009, unemployment was near 10%. Right now, it's sitting in the low 4s. That's the part one need you to really absorb. This isn't a recession showing up in the data. There's no crisis to point a finger at. This is simply what the structure produces under completely ordinary conditions, which means the structure itself is the crisis. So let me say the thing you're probably not hearing anywhere else: if you're underwater on a car right now, you didn't do something foolish. You met the market exactly where it stood. Prices ran ahead of wages, and the only lever anyone handed you was loan length, so you pulled the lever you were given. 28% of trade-ins being underwater isn't 28% of people being reckless, it's simply what the standard product does to the standard buyer under standard conditions. And nobody in that building is your enemy either, which is the frustrating part. There's no villain to point at, just a dozen people whose bonuses get calculated off different lines of the same invoice, none of whom get paid the day you say, "Actually, I think I'll just keep my current car a couple more years." By the way, if this kind of breakdown is what you're after, I run a community where I go deeper on these topics than YouTube allows, links below. Which finally brings us to Priya. 11 days after Danielle, nearly the identical car. Priya did 4 things, and none of them required being good at confrontation. She walked in already pre-approved, credit union first, pre-approval in writing. In the second quarter of 2025, the average 60-month new car loan ran about 5.75% at credit unions, versus 7.49% at banks. That gap is worth thousands of dollars. More importantly, it means dealer reserve has nothing to attach to. You can't be marked up on a rate you already own. If the dealership can beat it, wonderful, take theirs. That's the entire point of walking in with a number already in hand. She refused to discuss monthly payment at all, not aggressively, she simply kept answering a different question every time: what's the out-the-door price on this vehicle? Every time, she unstacked the boxes. Price first, agreed on and written down. Trade in second, with 2 written offers from competing buyers already in her bag. Financing third. Back-end products last, by which point she was negotiating against a fixed total instead of a moving target. And she chose 60 months with a real down payment, meaning she was never underwater, meaning she genuinely didn't need gap coverage. She bought it anyway, through her own insurer, for $200 instead of $900. She also bought a car that was 2 years old, so the steepest part of the depreciation curve was already somebody else's problem. Used car rates run a little higher, but she was borrowing far less principal, and principal is what you actually pay interest on. So, $4,300. That's the gap between Priya's deal and Danielle's, on nearly the same car, 11 days apart. $1,000 in rate markup, $700 in gap coverage, roughly $800 on the warranty, and $1,800 in extra interest from those additional 24 months. None of it ever showed up as a line item. None of it was illegal. And none of it was ever shown to Danielle. Now take just that difference, not the payment, not the car, and invest it at 7%. Over 10 years, it grows to about $8,500. Over 20 years, roughly $20,700. Over 30 years, around $34,000, and it keeps compounding well beyond that the longer it sits. Danielle will likely buy another car, probably 5 or 6 more across her lifetime. Marcus has already bought 4. If you're already sitting in one of these deals, and statistically, most of you are, the move isn't to feel bad about it. It's to check whether you can refinance. Roughly 900,000 borrowers with credit scores in the 720s and above are currently sitting in loans at 9 to 11% interest, largely because their rate was set in a room where a markup got applied and was never disclosed to them. Refinancing is boring. It takes about 20 minutes at a credit union. It's also the only thing in this entire video you can still undo. I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is financial advice. Every figure here is a snapshot that will need double-checking against whatever quarter you're standing in when you watch this. But the structure itself doesn't move, the structure is the entire point. So on the 3rd of next month, when that notification lands on your phone, don't just feel it. Open it. Find the rate. Because the person across that desk was never selling you a vehicle, he was selling you a payment, and the car is just the thing they hand you so it feels like you bought something else entirely.